I'm excited to be continuing our communication series.
Yeah, I mean, isn't communication like the most important thing that we can learn in our relationship, Nadine?
It is like a lifeblood
Yeah.
of thriving relationships. It is something that is so key, so important. And you know what? Like, communication is one of those things that you can't overdo it.
You can't over communicate. That's for sure. We've
No.
talked to our kids about that many times.
No, exactly. You can't over communicate. So last week we
Yep.
talked about going from conflict to connection. And so the focus was really on how to deal with conflict so that we heal from our fights. We heal from it and we actually come out better connected than when we started.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Dwayne and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one?
And so today, we're going to talk about the 5 common communication mistakes that couples make.
Yeah.
There's actually so much more.
There's a lot. But if you recognize these 5 common mistakes, I think you are more than on your way to developing solid communication skills.
Yes. I think that you're definitely in better shape than most.
No doubt.
Right? So let's get started.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start with the first one. Number 1.
Is something that I think, probably a lot of people, including myself, have done. I mean, maybe not just in our relationships, but in conversations.
Yes.
Which is poor listening.
Poor listening.
My goodness.
Oh, yeah. That's I think a lot of people listen in order to respond rather than in order to understand.
Yeah. Seeking to understand, asking that next question, or listening so that you can follow up with a question instead of listening so that you can respond with your own thing.
Yeah,
whatever that
exactly.
is, right?
Exactly. You end up missing out on truly understanding what the person's saying.
Yeah.
And that often leads to miscommunication and really feelings of neglect.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. So if I'm, just pouring my heart out to you, Nadine, and I'm just giving you like all the things that are on my heart, and then you respond with, well, this is how I'm feeling. And I'm like, wait a minute. I think we missed something here, didn't we?
I think so.
You're not going to respond to what I just said here? I mean, goodness. Nadine, you're like the last person to do that, but I'm probably more apt to responding in that way. But that's part of not listening, right? I mean, that's a piece that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, listening to someone intently, like where you're fully concentrated, you're really trying to understand and responding in a way that's thoughtful with your words, that's like giving them just the most amazing gift.
Yeah.
Right? Like imagine it being your birthday and you're opening up this gift from your spouse and it being like the most perfect gift. That is what listening with the intent to truly understand the heart of the person that's speaking to you.
Yeah.
That's what that feels like.
Yeah. And I think if you want to put that in practice, it is like actually listening to that person and being able to respond in a way that you basically kind of repeat the things that they say, right? So it's like, if I'm hearing you correctly, this is what you just said. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. Well, that means you were listening. So it might be maintaining eye contact. It might be nodding in agreement. People might notice this, but I say, yep, I get that. Yes.
Yeah.
Those are ways that you can, number one, show your partner that you're listening, but also kind of check yourself to make sure that you are actually doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And what's one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm talking?
is just somebody else being distracted, just not paying attention. So looking at your phone or looking away, actually really is like eye contact for the most part.
Yeah.
But looking away, or just you have a way of noticing if people are actually like there anymore.
Yeah.
You might just be thinking about something totally different. Like, oh, look at that butterfly.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But that's a big pet peeve for you.
Yes, it is. And also when people interrupt.
Oh, that too.
Yeah, when people interrupt and when you're talking, it does not feel good.
Yeah.
When you're pouring out your soul, or even if you're not, even if you're just talking about some funny joke you just heard and you want to share it with your spouse, right? And then halfway through, they interrupt with something completely unrelated, or they steal the joke from you.
Yeah.
Right? Like it just
don't steal the joke.
Don't steal the joke, but just don't interrupt, because that's not nice.
Yeah.
You're not really practicing active listening.
Yes.
Which is one of the ways that you can listen in a more effective and more productive way where the person feels truly understood and heard by you.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, and the other thing is when you guys are talking, get in the habit of setting aside distractions. Don't be on your phone.
Yeah, put the phone down.
Yeah.
No computers, no phone, no TV. The game needs to be off. Because you know that you're going to be like, look, touchdown, yeah. Or something like that. You just don't want to have any distractions because you're setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. Okay, so mistake number 2. What is it?
I think this is something that I think more women have expectations of their male partners. Is assuming mind reading abilities. So you have an expectation that I should know already exactly what you were thinking and how you wanted me to respond to it, and and all that stuff. And I'm like, this is an expectation that you didn't even tell me about. Like, how am I supposed to know if you didn't tell me? Like, I can't read your mind.
That is so funny because he's not wrong. Like, he is telling the truth with that. I figured Dwayne and I have been together 30 years. And sometimes, ladies, you will understand this because we do this as women all the time, where we can look at each other and we know. Right? Ladies, like, we know what the other person is thinking, what it is that we're referring to. I could do the same thing with Dwayne, and I'm trying so hard not to have to use words. So I'm using gestures with my eyes. I'm trying to get him to understand what I'm thinking.
This is like playing a game of Pictionary.
Yes.
And you just saying, and you just looking at me. And I'm supposed to figure out what the movie was or what you're describing without you saying anything whatsoever. Like, that's not a game at all. It's not fun.
No, it's not.
Yes,
but I just keep thinking that at this point in our relationship, there are some things that I should be able to communicate without words.
It may be true.
Yes. Right. And there are certain situations where saying it out loud would be inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And so I'm like, please read my thoughts. And I don't know if we have ever done that successfully.
There's been times.
No, I don't remember any times.
Well, just wait a little while and it might happen.
But you know what? The ladies out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about, because us girlfriends, like, we can get together and we could have an entire conversation without saying anything. Just how we do the eyes, the eyebrows, just all that, but not say anything in words. And we know exactly what the other person's saying.
Well, since you're married to a man.
Yes, I am.
You're going to have to express yourself clearly, Nadine.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay. And
yes.
how do we do that?
Well, you're absolutely correct, babe, because as we had stated last week, a lot of conflict comes from unmet expectations.
Yep.
But in many cases, we've never actually communicated what those expectations are, right? Like, we just expect our spouse to know. And so when they don't know, they don't do it, they don't follow through on what we were expecting, then we get upset and conflict happens.
Right. Don't get mad at me.
Right?
Just express yourself.
Exactly. So clear and direct communication is essential.
Yep.
Right? Because no one can read minds. Even though us ladies do a really good job of it with each other, it's not fair for us to have those same expectations of our husbands.
Yeah.
And so we need to express ourselves clearly, and we do that by using I statements
Yeah.
to express our feelings and our needs.
And then really just foster an environment where we feel okay. We feel comfortable with sharing our thoughts. I've talked about that before too, but it's like, hey, don't make me feel bad for not knowing and understanding exactly what was on your mind. Let's talk through it a little bit.
But, with that said, though, seeking clarification is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't understand what it is that I'm trying to say, asking questions.
Yeah.
If you're unsure of what I'm thinking, what I'm trying to convey, ask me.
Yeah.
Right?
Asking good clarification questions can usually not hurt you.
Yes, absolutely. So number 3.
Yeah. Is reacting emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully.
Okay, so reacting emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully.
Yeah. So I think you have to be a thinker reactor instead of a reactor and then thinking about it afterwards, right? So there's not many good things that have happened based on a knee-jerk reaction to a statement or to an action or anything like that. So it's really important to just take the emotions out of it, you know what I mean? Because that typically does escalate conflicts, right? So when you're really super emotional about things, and it's going to lead to regret.
Yeah.
We've had a couple situations like that, but not many, where you said something that you regretted, but really it's about taking a moment to pause before you respond, before you react, and really allow yourself to be more empathetic. We talked about being empathetic before, right?
Yes.
And having a constructive, really thoughtful answer or response based on something that's just a knee-jerk reaction that's more emotional.
Yeah. I mean, if you just pause first, take some deep breaths,
Yeah.
and then respond with I statements rather than assigning blame, right? Considering the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
Just because you think you're right doesn't mean the other person's wrong. And so if you keep that in the back of your mind always, and your spouse says something and your natural tendency is to react,
Right.
just take the time to remember that, hey, there's a possibility that you could both be right here. You just have differences in perspective.
Yeah. And you both need to understand those perspectives.
Exactly.
That's where the empathy comes in, because once you empathize and try to put yourself in the place of your spouse or that other person, then you'll be much closer to really understanding where they're coming from. And you say, oh, you know what? I don't think that we're that far off.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we're kind of going in the same direction, but I think there's just a misunderstanding here.
Yep. So we have our first 3 is poor listening, right? We listen and respond rather than trying to understand. Mistake number 2 is assuming mind reading abilities.
Yes.
Number 3 is reacting emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully.
Right.
And number 4 is what?
Sweeping issues under the rug, like just avoiding it altogether, right? I mean, you think about a situation that's happened. Oh my goodness, we're dealing with this again. I'd rather just not talk about it, right? Let's just go ahead and, if I don't say anything and maybe it goes on for, a half a day, maybe she'll just give up, forget about it, and we can just move on.
Yeah.
That's sweeping it under the rug. We're just avoiding resolving the issue instead of actually tackling it head on.
Yeah, well, that happens often with people who have avoidant conflict styles.
Yeah.
They would just rather keep peace by avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
Right?
And it might feel okay in the moment.
Yeah, but that's like trying to hold a fart in. You can't do it for forever.
You can. I've never ever heard you fart before, Nadine. So
my goodness.
You've been hurt. You've been avoiding a lot of conflicts.
Apparently,
you've been sweeping that under the rug.
Apparently so. Apparently so. But anyways, so yeah, I actually have worked with couples where I ask them, hey, how have things been going? And they're like, oh, great. We've just chosen not to talk about anything.
Yeah.
And really, that won't last for very long.
Yeah. I can tell you this. There's been quite a few times where I knew that there was something going on, or I already knew we had a disagreement, and I just didn't feel like talking about it. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave it. And the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get.
Yep.
So the best thing that you can do is address it right now instead of trying to avoid the conversation.
And there are some people that need time to process it, right? They need time to think about the situation so that they can come to the table thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And there are some people that want to deal with the issue right here, right now. Like they can't go to sleep until they deal with it. And so I think when your communication styles are different, it's good to have an understanding and a respect for your spouse's communication style. Because you and I know that I prefer to deal with things right here, right now.
Yeah.
And you prefer to wait for as long as possible. When we recognize that about each other, then we can come to an agreement that we're going to be respectful of the fact that it doesn't feel good to have to wait a really long time. But I also know that you need time to think things through.
Yeah. So we spend a little time reflecting, and then within a reasonable period of time,
Yes, within a
not
reasonable.
forever,
Yep.
then we get together and we address it. So
Exactly.
setting the time to discuss concerns in a in a relaxed, in a calm setting where there's not a lot of distraction, there's not a lot of hecticness going on around us, and then really just approaching the issue with the intent of trying to understand it and resolve the issue, right?
Yeah. For people with that avoidant conflict style, one of the best approaches is to approach it with curiosity. Because we like to avoid because we don't like conflict. Right? We prefer peace. And we think that peace is the absence of conflict. But really, if we just avoid it with curiosity, asking questions as opposed to blame, as opposed to just coming right out and saying, well, you did this.
Yes.
And that's how come I felt this way. But instead asking, hey, why did you feel the need to do that? Right? Why did you approach a situation in this way?
Yeah.
And then if all else fails, if you really have been just avoiding conversations about issues and you've swept so much under the rug that you're tripping over that rug, go and seek help.
Yeah.
See if you can get a third party to help mediate those conversations in a healthy way.
Yeah, it's going to be important to recognize when that need arises.
Yes.
Because there are going to be times where you can resolve a challenge on your own. But then again, there's going to be times where it's like, okay, this is coming up a lot.
Yes.
Or we're hitting a roadblock or a bottleneck.
Yes.
Every time we get to this point, it's probably we're going to need a mediator. We're going to need somebody that's going to hopefully help us to get past it and help us to see things that we're not seeing right now.
I actually have a lot of clients that and I'm not saying this is the healthiest way to go about it, but for their relationship in this season, they actually hold off on having those difficult conversations until they're sitting in front of me.
Yeah.
And then we work through how to have it together, right, in a healthy manner. And so they have those conversations right in front of me.
Yeah.
And usually they work things out within the hour that we're together.
That's it. That's a good way to approach it, too.
Yeah. That's one way.
Yeah.
So the last common communication mistakes that couples make.
Yeah. So that's kind of the big one.
This is the big one. We've saved for last.
These are the things that you have to recognize that are happening while they're happening. You know what I mean? And really trying to avoid them. We're talking about like using negative communication patterns. So if you've heard us talk about the 4 horsemen, engaging in criticism, it's contempt, it's defensiveness, or stonewalling.
Yes.
Those are the challenges that as couples, if you identify those things happening in your relationship, we need to squash it right now.
Yeah. And let's give credit to where it's due. So the 4 horsemen was coined by Dr. John Gottman. He is probably one of the leading relationship experts. And so he coined that term, the 4 horsemen, to talk about criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling, right? And so, as Dwayne says, recognizing when these patterns happen, these negative patterns, is so important.
Yeah.
Because the 4 horsemen, these are negative communication patterns that you may see them in your relationship from time to time. You might see one of them, 2 of them, and you might see them once in a while. But if you're seeing a pattern of them happening over and over.
Yeah, more frequently.
And several of them, then that is not good at all.
Yeah.
Right? And I won't go into how bad it is, but it's been considered pretty toxic to a relationship.
This is the point where you have to get serious. You have to get serious and say, okay, we are dealing with some things that can absolutely cause us to turn away from each other and put us in a place where we don't want our relationship to be. If we want to be together long term, we have to address these challenges right now head on.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's briefly go over what each one means, right? So criticism is a perceived attack on one's person or character. It's not about the behavior, but it's about the person. Right. It is.
You always do this.
It usually has the words always or never in it. And it is often about the person. So, and criticism is also, like Dwayne says, it usually has the words always and never in it, but it also often has the word you in it. And really, to combat criticism, you need to turn it into a complaint, right? Because no one is perfect. We don't all do things perfectly. Sometimes we show up in a way that's disappointing to our spouse. And so rather than criticizing our spouse for a behavior, maybe we turn it into a complaint and we turn it into an I statement. So rather than saying, you always leave the dishes in the sink, you are a slob. What's your problem? Were you raised in a barn? Whatever. Or rather than saying that, start with, I know I'm being so hurtful. Say it from an I feel perspective.
So when
say something like, I feel overwhelmed by all the chores that have to be done around the house. Yesterday, you had promised that the dishes would get done and they didn't get done. Can you please help me? Be more consistent in getting the dishes done. Right. And so that's a complaint versus what I said earlier.
And I think it's very clear the difference in approach, because a lot of times that issue or the challenge of dishes being in the sink is still there regardless, right? It's really about the approach. Sometimes people say, oh, it wasn't really what you said, it was how you said it. That's the exact example of that.
Yeah, exactly. So let's give an example of defensiveness.
Okay, so we can still go with the dishes.
Yeah,
you can still go with the dishes. And so you say, oh, well, why'd you leave the dishes in the sink? You're supposed to do that this morning. And I would say, well, that wasn't my fault. I was rushing this morning. It's like, why are you always blaming it on me? You could have done it yourself too, right? And that's a defensive nature. You're not really thinking about, number one, if it was your responsibility to do it in the first place. And then number two, the feelings of your spouse. And really trying to resolve it in a way where you are addressing the other person's feelings and empathizing on actually what caused your spouse to feel that way. But instead, you're just trying to deflect the blame and putting it back on the other person.
Yeah, defensiveness essentially says, I'm not the problem, you are.
Right.
Right. And no one wants to believe that they're the problem. Right. I make a complaint and then you come back and say, I'm not the problem. You're the problem. Right. No one's going to feel good about that. And a lot of people think that, I was just trying to protect myself. I needed to stand up for myself in this situation. And that's all good and noble. But all you're doing is you're deflecting. Right. You are turning the focus away from what you did or didn't do. And you're putting it on
the other person.
Take
responsibility whenever you need to.
So stonewalling.
That's a tough one, because I think that is a lot of times on the side of the male person in the relationship. And it does come when there's feelings of being flooded that happens within you, when there's just so many things coming at you and your emotions get so high and overwhelmed that you just say, you know what? I can't even deal with this anymore. I am not even going to hear your complaints. I'm not going to hear you arguing with me. I'm literally going to focus on something totally different and not respond to you. That's basically like you're talking to a wall now. I'm not going to respond. That's what stonewalling is.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's not healthy either. A lot of people go to stonewalling thinking that, it's better than the alternative.
Like my mama said that if you don't have something good to say, don't say nothing at all. Well, okay, I think that's okay in this situation, but if you continue to do it, especially in an argument, it's probably not the best idea.
Yeah, it becomes really a part of negative communication patterns. And so you don't want that. If you're stonewalling, you need to find a way to help regulate your emotions. You need to find a way to say, okay, you know what? I'm feeling flooded right now, right? I'm feeling overwhelmed with emotions. Can we take a timeout?
Yeah.
And that timeout is really something that you are asking for yourself so that you can go and engage in some stress reducing exercise to get your heart rate back down to the normal range. Because when you get flooded, oftentimes your heart rate gets elevated to like 100 beats per minute.
Right.
For some people, like athletes, it doesn't even have to go that high. And so you're flooded, you're overwhelmed with emotion. And when that happens repeatedly, you can't even think straight. You're not processing things. And when that happens repeatedly, stonewalling occurs. And so to protect your relationship, ask for a timeout. And that timeout really shouldn't be any more than 20 minutes to 24 hours is what I tell people.
So you're doing it with the intent of coming back, but coming back with a sober mind.
Yes.
With the intention of now having a calm conversation.
Yes.
And going about it in a way that's with the intent of resolving the issue.
Yes.
But also understanding where your spouse is coming from in that moment too.
The goal of communication is always understanding because you may not have a solution.
Yep.
Right? So resolving it is not always going to happen, but you can always try to understand each other. And that's really the key, right? If you take nothing else away from this episode, it's the goal of communication is truly to try to understand your spouse's perspective and their feelings.
Yep.
You may not be able to resolve it. You may not even agree with their perspective, but understanding it and having them feel like you truly understand where they're coming from, that should be your goal.
Yeah.
All right. So the last one is contempt. Contempt is the fourth horseman. And this is the one that Dr. Gottman says is poison to a relationship.
Definitely.
It's so toxic that I believe it can exist on its own. That if there's contempt that's happening repeatedly,
no doubt,
it has been shown to result in relationship disillusion, which is basically, relationship falling apart.
Yeah.
And contempt is...
It's the one that hurts, I think.
Yeah, this is the one that hurts. This is when you are intentionally putting your spouse down.
Yeah.
This is when you see yourself as being better than them, right? Like this is where the eye rolls.
Yeah.
This is when the name calling. This is when you're cursing at each other.
Right.
This is when
you don't really have much desire to not hurt their feelings, I guess. I was thinking about a different word, but you don't have any regard for their feelings whatsoever. You're really more about just getting your feelings out and feeling like, okay, I've got that all out, so I feel a whole lot better now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But you're doing it with malice in mind, I think, and to the detriment of your spouse, and it's just not going to end well.
No, not at all. Not at all. When people do that, it's almost like they elevate themselves. They put themselves in a position of superiority over their spouse because their feelings matter more, right? Their perspective matters more. Like they're more important than their spouse's feelings.
Yeah.
Right? Understanding them is more important than trying to understand their spouse.
Yeah, I agree.
That is contempt. So how do we approach it so we're not contemptuous? Like, what are some of the things that we can do to not demonstrate contempt for our spouse? So one of the things that I teach is to develop a culture of appreciation.
Yeah.
Right? That is when, I talk about all the time the fondness and admiration exercise that I have my couples do. Oftentimes, when we get to a point of being contemptuous with one another, that is usually when we have allowed our negative thoughts of our spouse to override the positive thoughts. And that's a dangerous place to be. You don't want that.
Because all you're seeing is negative. You're doing something good. You find the negative thing that somehow you reckon something that they did wrong, even if they did something really good towards you or towards somebody else, right?
Yeah, studies have shown that when our negative feelings, negative thoughts about our spouse overrides the positive, that we can miss the positive things that they do, their bids to connect, by up to 50%.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we get to that point of being so negative about each other, that's really dangerous. And that usually ends up breeding contempt.
Yeah.
And so I tell people to do exercises where you are spending a few minutes a day, anywhere from a couple minutes to like 10 minutes a day, thinking about positive things, something you love, admire, respect, or appreciate about the other person. And just meditate on that. Just think about it, not even just in words, but like try to recall a memory and then get to the point where you are actually scanning for those positive behaviors that you were thinking about in just your everyday life and your everyday interaction with your spouse, and then let them know.
That's what I was going to say. Like the next step with that is is letting them know about it, because that can override any of the negative things that you may have said to that person. And compliments and encouragement go a long way. Right? When we haven't talked about the love bank or anything like that, but if you're filling that bank with, compliments, with encouragement, with love, and then a negative things kind of slips in there, it's not going to affect them in the same way that it would if it was all negative, if it was all withdrawals from that bank.
Exactly. And so recognizing and replacing these negative patterns, these 4 negative patterns with those positive interactions that we talked about is so important.
But the key is recognizing them. Once you recognize them, then at least you have the evidence that, okay, well, this is something that we're dealing with. Now it's time to introduce the antidote and see if we can reverse the effects of whatever issue that we're dealing with right now, whether it be stonewalling or contempt or defensiveness or whatever it is.
Exactly. So let's summarize. So the 5 common communication mistakes that couples make. Mistake number 1, poor listening. Number 2, assuming mind reading abilities. Number 3, reacting emotionally instead of responding thoughtfully.
Number 4 would be sweeping it under the rug.
Yep. And number 5, using negative communication patterns. And that's the criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Right? So avoid those. Avoid those things. And again, there's a lot of other communication mistakes.
There's a lot. But I think, like I said before, if you identify these main 5 that we talked about, you should feel good about that.
Yes.
And you're moving in the right direction and you're being intentional, right?
Yes.
You're being intentional about ensuring that you've elevated your level of communication to the point where you're trying to avoid any slipping through the cracks, right?
Yes.
I think that's important.
Yeah. And I mentioned communication styles and conflict styles a couple of times during this episode. So what we're going to do is we are going to include a link to a quiz to figure out what your communication style is and also what your conflict style is. So if you don't know what it is, you could find out today. All right. So just go to that link and you'll
click on it, take the test.
Yeah, exactly. It's a quick 3-minute quiz. So it doesn't take long at all.
Yeah.
And so we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, share with someone else and also
comment,
leave us a review. We'll see you next week.
All right.